All right, moving on to her content area assessment. I did not give this one to Paulina just yet, but I did kind of go over some of the things that I might change. So let me tell you a little bit about the test. I'm going to tell you about the content validity and then the modifications I put in place. So the description of the test, the test was a multiplication test. It shows how to solve a multiplication problem in 3 different ways, using arrays, repeated addition, and commutative property. Then it has, and that does it 2 times, and then it has solving word problems, and that has 2 word problems that they should solve, and then finally it ends with creating your own word problem. A pretty typical test. Now, considering the validity of the test, I did realize this was actually pretty eye-opening to me because I actually created this test. So I did realize that it was very content-heavy. Very content heavy in the language. It had a lack of written directions, which I was shocked by for myself, and I think that's because I've always given the directions verbally, so I definitely needed to change that. It was linguistically heavy with the word problem sentences and also the dialect or regional issues that showed on the test. So and there were multiple meaning words like baggy and table. Baggy is not always the word that's used around the country, and table can be like a table you eat at or like a table chart. So some of the modifications I put in place, I added directions and I highlighted the similar sections so that students' eyes would be drawn to the same thing. I put in fill in the blank equations to kind of prompt students into the equations I was looking for. I underlined vocabulary words to be explained before students took the test, or as students were taking the test, they could point them out and ask for more clarification. I simplified the directions and added word problems and I added only the necessary information into the word problem. So I chose more commonplace words while doing this. Some of the words were a little more complex, so I made them a lot simpler. I highlighted key terms. So for example, I highlighted group, items, and numbers so that students could draw connections between the word problems and the word problem they would have to create at the end. And then finally, I incorporated pictures. So I'm going to go to the next slide where you can see some of the changes that I made, and I'll just give you just a minute to kind of look those over. As you can see, just like by looking over the original test versus the modified test, you can tell there are many different changes. The highlighting, the pictures, the fill in the blank sentences, the directions, and even those key terms, like I said, I highlighted the numbers all in the same color, the items in the same color, and the groups in the same color. And those are very important terms in multiplication. So lots of modifications, lots less words too. So when I look at the analysis of all of this data, I learned so much about Paulina, and I broke this down into the 5 different assessments that I did give or created. For the oral assessment, I realized that she uses images and pictures a lot to guide her discussion. I also noticed that she has a slightly higher social level of speech versus her academic level. And this could be possibly due to her comfort level in her speech when she's socializing versus when she is speaking academically. And I can see that difference too now as she's become more comfortable, as she talks more with groups, but not as much whole group when it comes to academic focuses. For the reading assessment, I learned that she had trouble with the TH sound, the interdental fricative. She has a slower paced reading, so some things I can work on there. And she has an ability to match the word to definition when provided with the picture. So again, I'm going to try to push her a little bit further to make those connections. She struggles with understanding that we replaces the whole phrase my sister and I, not just the 2 subjects, so things to look forward to. In writing, I found that she can be pushed more to give detailed and specific words as she still provides them and doesn't allow her spelling to limit her choice. I also noticed that she has some errors in sight words. So some things to work on in the future as well. Self-assessment, I learned that I was very surprised by her level of confidence and excited by it, and I was elated and surprised by her home involvement. I can really tell that parents are working hard and siblings are working hard to get her to where she needs to be in her language learning, in both English and in Spanish. And then finally, for the content assessment, I learned that we need less words, more visual aids, and clearer directions. So all things that we can not only use with Paulina, but with other students that are EL learners as well. Looking even further into the data, I noticed the instrument with the most meaningful data for me was self-assessment. And as we know from Brown and Abuwikrama, I wonder if I'm saying that right, it increases motivation and direct engagement in a child's learning. And I could really tell this as I was going over these assessments with Paulina. She really lit up and I really got to know her personally. It also made me aware of her self-perception and her confidence levels in English, which I did not know she was that confident because she's so shy. So I learned so much that I would not have known if I had not given her this assessment. When preparing for more instruction, some goals that I have is to push Paulina more since she feels confident and she can handle it. So I would like to do that. I'd also like to meet more frequently with her. I would like to continue the use of visuals and graphic organizers to continue to support, allocating more time for accurately and appropriately filling out the graphic organizer because I know there were some mistakes there, and if she really relies on it, I want to give her the supports to keep her pushing herself in the right direction. I would definitely do some work on replacing 2 or more subjects with the pronoun we. We would also work on reteaching the pronunciation of th, using the tip of the tongue against the teeth rather than it coming off as the th sound, th. Very different, but sounds similar to an ELL learner. Practicing the sight words with reading and with writing. So first with reading, maybe with some flashcards, and then with writing later on as a follow-up. Using a variation of sentence starters to develop that complexity. And then other assessments I might want to administer are portfolio assessments, as it's an expression of students' lives and identities, hands-on learning. It's really based on the individual and it has critical thinking. And also because I would like to try performance-based assessments. It's really engaging in real-world tasks. And I'd like to see how Paulina would use the languages in all of the domains within one task. So I'd like to see how it could incorporate writing and reading and speaking and listening all in one. Some recommendations to prepare to assess ELLs that I've learned along the way. Really know your student's current level as much as possible. That really helped me, especially when making that vocabulary matching. Consider their knowledge background. Check the cultural validity and reliability of the assessment. That I really learned through the multiplication test that I made for all of 3rd grade, and I really had to modify that to kind of make sure it was more reliable and valid. Model examples and expectations. Always do this. That's what I tried to do with the writing assessments in particular that I gave to students, and I think that really helped to make Paulina more successful. Allow student discourse beforehand to talk and brainstorm their ideas. Other further recommendations I have for administering assessments for ELLs is rephrase the question or directions as needed, pre-teach unknown or uncommon vocabulary, and be ready to also explain it during the test too. Give more examples. Provide ample wait time, use manipulatives, provide post-assessment time to reflect with students. I think that's super important because I would have liked to kind of reflect a little bit more with Paulina on the assessments I gave her, and I know I did take some of those opportunities to do that, and I think it would be really beneficial to kind of reflect and see what the students think about it too. Also allowing for students to read their writing out loud. It really helped me to clarify Paulina's understanding, and I was able to place her at a more accurate level than if I had just read her her assessment without doing that additional feedback. Some further recommendations. A recommendation I have is for analyzing data, use multiple assessments to gather information, academic and social. It really taught me a lot about the student. Consider the environment and the setting. Sometimes this puts into effect how they do on their assessment. Use a variety of assessment formats, so written, oral, multiple choice matching. You never know what you can learn about the student based on the type of assessment that they're using, and they might be stronger in one than the other. Finally, use data to inform your instruction, adjust and modify the assessments, know student perceived challenges and strengths, and figure out their outlook on their own capabilities. And give feedback or washback to the students. That's super important to let the student know how they're doing and what goals they have next, and developing that with them. And finally, reaching out to families. So making a plan for support, especially if you found out, like I did with Paulina, that she actually has a really good support system at home, and we can put that in place to continue her learning. For my process reflection, I have a few different things I'd like to share. Assessing ELLs is very different, so we need more frequent prompting and guidance, even through the assessments. Use of more graphic organizers and visuals, rephrasing questions and or directions, providing more examples, and pre-teaching definitions for uncommon or unfamiliar words. Things that worked really well in the assessments I gave were matching word to picture and definition, prompting questions to guide discussion in oral language assessments, using the WIDA access scores. Even though hers was a little outdated from last year, it was a 1, I kind of used that as a base, and I was able to accurately assess and decide that she was approximately level 2, and as you can see from many of my assessments, she ended up being a level 2. Using lots of manipulatives, that's very helpful, even with vocabulary terms, and use self-assessments to gain lots of insight, especially on home life. Room to revise. Some things that I would like to revise in the future is confusing wording and questions. So I asked about Paulina's plans for spring break, and she thought I said plants, and so she started responding by her mom watering. So then I kind of switched it to something a little more familiar, and I said, do you have an idea of what you're doing over spring break? And she was able to answer more accurately. Finally, I would like more exposure to different types of formatting and examples, or a refresher beforehand. I know specifically when she did her grammar assessment, it was a little removed from the time that we kind of went over that piece of grammar, so definitely including those in the future. And some more reflection. What do I now know about assessing an EL that I didn't know before? I know a vast array of ways to provide accommodations for ELL. So please definitely use this link to help you as well. I know the importance of self-assessment in language abilities, and I know student self-perception is very important, and I know that ways to appropriately modify a test for ELLs without changing academic content. I know that's so hard because we want to keep the rigor, but we also want to make sure that students can access it. Also, teachers, while assessing an ELL student, please keep in mind it's trial and error. Sometimes it's going to be a hit or miss. Keep trying and see what works for you and what works for that student. Collect as much informal data as possible. You can really learn a lot by taking those informal assessments, like just observing students with those checklists, doing a portfolio, watching them complete a project. Those type of things really help us. Also using a variety of assessment types and formats so you get a more rounded picture of what the student can do. So don't just rely on the standardized or summative assessments. And finally, what I'd still like to know about assessing ELLs, I know some of my awesome colleagues kind of responded to these questions, but I'm still kind of figuring out the answer for myself. How do you find time to meet with all ELL students in your classroom, especially when you have such a high number? I'm still trying to find that nice balance to get to all of them and trying to prioritize greater needs. And how do you accurately assess students if you don't also speak their native language? This is definitely a problem I've run into, as I do not speak Spanish. I am currently still learning, but I really want to make sure that I I am appropriately and accurately assessing them and placing them at their level, even if they're using their Spanish to understand their English. So some things we're always still working on. And finally, I have a reference page for you to check out if you have any more interest in it. Thank you so much for listening and taking the time. I really appreciate you, and good luck.